Welcome to the NoSleep Nightmarathon. This story is by the author, Spartan School, titled, Something is Pretending to Be My Friend. Last summer, I started working at a summer camp. And it's your standard summer camp. There's a cabin for the boys, a cabin for the girls. They were around 10 or 13 years old. A cabin for the counselors, and a separate building that works as an office/medical/house for the two adults that run the show. The counselor cabin is larger than the others, and has two rooms that face each other across a recreation/living space. It has a pool table and an old TV with an SNES hooked up to it. It's a pretty chill way to spend the summer. And there were 5 counselors at any given time. Each room was designated and shared by gender. My first summer there was awesome. I met some really cool people, and the kids were great, and it was a blast. I was one of 3 male counselors, and the other 2 were girls, your typical cute camp girls. We would spend our afternoons in the sun, swimming or hiking, and the nights shooting pool and clearing Mario Bros. While we were all really good friends, David and I really hit it off. We liked the same bands, had the same interests, and the whole 9 yards. And it was nice to have someone I considered a real friend out there. Camp ends too quickly, though. The end of the summer was coming, and we knew we would have to part ways. I added everyone that I worked with on Facebook the second I got home. The only internet access in the camp was an old computer in the office. We planned to have a group chat where we would keep in touch. I kept in contact with the 4 others, especially David. We added each other on Xbox and would game together late into the night. A few months into the school year, and the group was drifting apart. It wasn't really anyone's fault, but living on different sides of the province was starting to take its toll. We were spending time with our school friends, and I didn't blame anyone. I would still hit up David regularly, but our conversations grew further and further apart. Early the next year, David and I's favorite band was playing at a show in Toronto, where I lived. I messaged him on Facebook about the event, and he was thrilled, ensuring me that he would drive down. I told him he could stay at my place, and it was settled. I was really excited to see him again. A couple other people at my school liked this band, but no one that I would consider a good friend. It would be nice to watch them rock out with someone who got it. The day of the concert rolls around, and David messages me that he's running late and will meet me at the hall. No big deal. I head to the show and wait outside for him. He showed up right before the band was going to go on. He was stoned out of his mind. And I shrugged it off. Getting baked at a concert is hardly uncommon. Also, I didn't want to seem like a buzzkill. It did make me wonder how well I really knew David. The concert was a blast. I got so sweaty in the mosh pit that I looked like I'd been swimming. And just awesome punk music and hanging out with a good buddy. I suggested that we head home when the show had ended. David shook his head and insisted that he wanted to stay out and party some more. He'd been talking to some girls, and reluctantly I agreed. We had a pretty good time rolling around the nearby parks, smoking and drinking from a flask one of the girls had brought. I was getting a little buzzed when David pulled a baggie of mushrooms from his pocket. For whatever reason, the sight sobered me up pretty quick. I took him aside and said that we had been out late enough, and I wasn't really down to do shrooms. David laughed it off and basically told me to head home, and if he couldn't find a warm place to sleep, he looked sideways at the girls as he said this. He would call my cell. If it came to it, he could sleep in his car. I didn't want to leave my friend, but I really didn't want the night to get out of hand. I sighed, told him to message me if he needed, and bro hugged him goodbye. After taking the brunette's phone number, I jogged home. We had wandered near enough to my house. The next day, I woke up fully clothed and hungover. I didn't think I had too much, but my body had other ideas. I ran to the toilet to yak and suddenly remembered that David had been out all night. The only message on my phone said something like, "Hey man, you'll never believe me, but I hooked up with both those girls. What a great night. Anyway, thanks for having me out, man. I won't see you again till summer. I need to drive straight home. I forgot I'd work this morning." I thought it was weird that he had come and gone in such a flurry, but his house was at least a 4-hour drive away, so leaving early for work made sense. After the concert, David and I grew closer again, for a few weeks, before the inevitable drift. It's funny how being geographically far apart can make friendships diminish. It wasn't like I didn't like him anymore, just that with girls and exams coming up, I needed to keep my focus homebound. Before I knew it, I was applying for another year of summer camp. I hadn't spoken to David in well over a month. Before I left, I shot him a quick message on Facebook. "Hey dude, camp starts soon. Hoping to see you there again this year." Something casual. I saw that he viewed the message, but after 5 minutes of last-minute packing, he had not responded, so I shrugged it off and threw my phone in my bag. It was a long drive, having only one vehicle. My parents planned to drop me off and pick me up when camp ended a month later. I was thrilled to be out of the big smoke and into the crisp air of Algonquin Park, which, for those of you who don't know, is a very large forest park in northern Ontario. The counselors always get to camp a day before the kids so we can get set up and organized. I was one of the last ones there. I introduced myself to Jane, Sam, and Abigail, who preferred Abby. They seemed very run-of-the-mill for camp counselors, but I was excited to meet new people, especially girls. David was nowhere to be seen. We piled into the office building, and the two other gentlemen instructed us on our duties and responsibilities. There were the first aid kit, the curfew for campers, things like that. This was the girls' first year, so I was considered somewhat of a senior and had to answer many a rhetorical and theoretical question they asked. As they droned on what to do in a case a camper goes missing, my mind wandered to David. Was he even going to show up this year? As much as I liked the idea of being alone with 3 girls all month, I would have liked to have my friend there. I turned my head to glance out the window, and smiled as I saw David approaching the building. I didn't think about it until later, but the window was on the side of the building that faced towards the heart of the forest, opposite the side of the road and parking lot. David came in and apologized for being late. The supervisor seemed not to mind because he was also in his second year of camp and knew the rundown. After the meeting, the counselors quickly set about getting everything ready. We encouraged the newcomers to rush through the duties so we would have the evening to relax and get to know one another. The light on one of the boys' cabins was giving us some difficulties, so I was inside replacing it when David and I first got a chance to talk properly. He wandered into the cabin, whistling a tune. "Nabby's pretty cute, huh?" The standard David. I laughed, and we got to chatting and catching up. I've been rambling for a while, but I think those details were important. Last night is when things started to get very weird. I was in bed, following a night of destroying David in Super Mario Kart. I must have been sleeping for at least a few hours when something woke me up. In a groggy state, I glanced at the clock. 3:44, I grumbled to myself and rolled over in bed. The room I was splitting with David was fairly large, with opposite bunk beds on each side. But from where I was, I could clearly see David was not sleeping in the room. In fact, it looked like he had not even touched the blankets. I tried to remember how events right before bed had unfolded, but I was drawing a blank. The long day of travel, work, and gaming had taken its toll, and I just flopped onto bed and crashed. Knowing something was off, I started to shake off the sleepiness. I slowly sat up and reached towards the lamp on the bedside table. As I grabbed the chain, I heard a dull thumping sound outside of the cabin. My bed was against the wall that faced towards the clearing of the center of camp. There's a window that looks out that way further down along the wall, but from the angle in bed, I couldn't see through it. My heart started racing, but my hand would not pull the chain. In my head, I thought through the possibilities. Bear? Moose? Deer? Mountain lion? One of the supervisors? It could be anything. The animals weren't a threat as long as I was in the cabin. What made the lump in my throat was that David wasn't in his bed. I felt responsible for him in the way that friends do, and I knew I had to look out the window and make sure everything was okay. I slid from under the covers slowly, trying very hard not to make any noise. My bare feet rested on the ice-cold floorboards. My body was now in full alert mode. I slowly and stealthily made my way towards the window, performing some sort of golem-esque movement as I went. As I moved along the wall, my angle of the window improved, and the campsite was coming into vision slowly. I got to a point where I could see about half of what the window showed, and still couldn't see anything. It gets dark out here, but we have fairly large security lights that go on at night, no brighter than a streetlight. My eyes were adjusting to the scene when something came flying from the right side of the window into my line of sight. I instinctively flung myself against the wall. At this point, it probably would have been best if I just crawled back to bed and hid, but of course I didn't. Who does the rational and sensible thing in these situations? Besides, the mystery was too much. I slid along the wall and crouched under the window. Slowly, I rose my head to get a peek over the bottom edge, and I saw what was causing the noise. It was David, and he was dancing. I'm not talking disco. He was flinging himself to and fro, leaping into the air, spinning around and flailing his arms, really putting on a show, and I also noticed that he was completely naked. My heart still frantically beating, I wasn't sure what to do. This shit was weird. They didn't train me to deal with my roommate going crazy and dancing in the night. I glanced back around the room and saw David's bag open in the floor near his bed. Something in my head clicked. David must have brought along some of those mushrooms and was having a wild trip. Not the end of the world, but still dangerous to use stuff like that in the wilderness. If he got lost, he might never be found. I started rising more and more in the window as I contemplated the alien scene. A lot happened very quickly. And the first thing I noticed was the smell. It flooded into the room and nearly suffocated me with its intensity. It smelled like copper. Thick, old copper. I knew enough to know the smell of blood, and I had to fight back the urge to vomit. The second thing that happened was the moonlight coming from the clouds to illuminate the clearing in the pale light. David had stopped dancing, facing the forest, and his chest was heaving up and down heavily. At this point, I was standing completely upright in the window, transfixed with the scene in front of me. David began walking towards the forest, and I felt a cold dread start to creep through the floorboards into my legs and my chest. He took each step with precision and purpose. 10 paces from the forest, he stopped and stood for a while. The panic was settling in fully now. I was barely breathing. The cold had spread through my body. The smell had gotten worse and worse with every second. My brain must have realized I was suffocating because I suddenly took a sharp breath. I had barely made a noise, but I instinctively knew it was too much and that he had heard me. I saw David snap his head around and look directly at me. I dropped to the floor and frantically crawled back to my bed. I kept telling myself that he shouldn't have been able to see me. It was too dark in the room and too bright outside. I started to cry as my eyes darted back and forth between the door and the window. Hours went by with nothing happening, but I was definitely too afraid to go look out the window again. Eventually, I fell asleep. I don't know how. When I woke up, it was with a start. Fearing for my safety, my eyes immediately flew to David's bed. He was sound asleep and snoring. I almost laughed when I realized that I must have dreamt the whole thing. I asked the girls later that day if they had noticed anything weird during the night, just to be sure, but they only mentioned that it seemed very cold. I was beyond rattled, but I managed to convince myself that it must have been a very brutal nightmare. David seemed completely like himself. Some part of my brain refused to mention the dream to anyone. The other counselors could tell I was bothered, so I said the camp food had given me an upset stomach. They laughed at this and didn't pester me further. Later that day, Campers were starting to arrive, which is a busy ordeal. We had to learn names and meet parents, make sure the kids had everything they needed. Basically just boring work stuff. There were about 20 campers in all. I was sent to the office to input the names of the kids who had shown up and make sure the payments had gone through. I typed away on a spreadsheet for a few minutes, but eventually, being a 17-year-old, got bored and curious about what was going on with my friends back home. I booted up the internet browser and logged into Facebook. Looking over my shoulder at the door to make sure no one would catch me slacking, I had a few messages, but one stood out that made my heart drop into my stomach and my eyes shake. David. Hey man, sorry for the late response. I won't be at camp this year. My parents are taking me to Italy. Have fun without me. Let me know if I miss out on any cute girls. Not sure what to do, and beginning to panic, I quickly Googled some details from last night, and it led me here. I'm posting because I think it might be my best bet on finding out what the hell is going on. A lot of you seem to know about paranormal things. I'll make sure I check back tonight. I can come up with a good enough excuse to need the computer. I know I should just up and leave, but I'm afraid. Hello. I hope you enjoyed this narration. If you did, be sure to check out Spartan School's Reddit page. They also have a YouTube channel, so I'm going to be linking to their YouTube channel in the description as well. Stay tuned for parts 2 and 3 of this story, as well as more stories from my NoSleep Nightmarathon.